Mostly things are strange in this world. Mostly we don't see them because we went to American shuls. That's how they write it, that's how I'm going to say it. Sick and tired of all the ridiculous things I learned in shul. From the very beginning, the word one ought to start with a wah sound, and it don't have one. Don't have a wah in one. Why? There's a wah in why. There ain't no wah at the beginning of one. There's an E you don't need. There ain't no wah in one. Then you look at two, there's a wah you don't even need. Could that be the wah from one that flipped down into two? That's why everybody's bored of education. They ought to call it Stress Me Street.
Good morning. It's Tuesday, Ayn-Rand Tuesday, October the 31st. Happy Halloween. And this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. This is Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, rules for radical conservatives, rules for retrogrades, rules for patriots, bishop-barron, Ayn Rand quote of the day, my take, Vivek-Ramaswamy, and the latest installment of Ayn Rand's book, Philosophy, Who Needs It? All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, there's no free lunch. 250 economic truths by David Bahnsen.
I wish to preach not the doctrine of ignoble ease, but the doctrine of the strenuous life, the life of toil and effort, of labor and strife. To preach that highest form of success which comes not to the man who desires mere easy peace, but to the man who does not shrink from danger, from hardship, or from bitter toil, and who out of these wins the splendid ultimate triumph. Theodore Roosevelt. If I could only leave readers of this book with one message on the glory of free enterprise, it would not be about monetary policy, tax rates, supply and demand, or marginal utility. All of those things matter, and all of them plus so much more will be addressed throughout this book. But the main thing is this: the human flourishing that feeds the soul of mankind through earned success. In this sense, I write not merely about the system of market-based economics or even its societal value. I write about the existential value to human beings that comes from freedom, from adversity, and from the freedom to conquer adversity.
And that was No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for radical conservatives.
Great moments in the people's history. Occasionally, Film Comment or Cahiers du Cinema or some other fanboy mag will ask me about my youth in an effort to explain to their readers just why I am the go-to guy for every B-list sequel kicking around this town. What made me the man I am today? So in order to oblige them, I've scribbled down this little scenario as part of my ongoing series of Scènes de la Vie du Dave. Naturally, I speak of myself in the third person. The scene is an Institute for Social Research classroom on the Columbia University campus in New York City. The year is 1999. Students chat, flirt. A few of them have cell phones, a couple have laptops. Half of them look hungover, and the other half like they just fell out of bed, which they probably did. The camera pans over their ranks, stopping to ogle the pretty girls in their fashionable low-riding blue jeans, finally finding our hero, David Kahane, an incredibly handsome young man of about 22, who looks like the love child of Adonis and Joan Baez. We notice, somewhat incongruously, a grand piano in one corner of the room. On the blackboard, we see something scrawled in European handwriting. Great moments in the people's history. The door opens and the classroom falls silent as Professor Carl George von Yu zu Benjamin Marcus enters the classroom. He is an imperious, august man in his early hundreds, but there's still a spring in his step, and his eyes burn with revolutionary fervor. Instead of speaking, he heads straight to the piano and sits down, his hands hovering over the keys. At once, the apparently lazy, typical American college students shoot to their feet, and as he begins to play, they break into a rousing chorus, in German, of the famous Alabama song from Mahogany by Kurt Weill and Bert Brecht, ending with the refrain, "Oh, don't ask why." The music finishes, the students sit. The professor speaks in a German accent so thick, he might as well be speaking German itself. "Excellent. Ja, this is how it was in the glory years. Back when we rose up as one against, how you say in English, the man oder. Besser gesagt, the pigs. Of which revolution am I speaking, Kinder?" One pretty girl's hand shoots up immediately. "The Bavarian Council Republic of 1918? Nein, barks the old professor. For a centenarian, he still has quite a pair of lungs. The class jock, an outstanding intramural ping-pong player, tries next. "The Spartacus Uprising and the Free Socialist Republic in Berlin?" The professor slams his fist down on his desk. "Überhaupt nicht," he thunders. "That was 1919, du Dummkopf." Dave ventures a guess. "The Revolution of 1848? The professor snorts. "No, even I am not that old. I am talking about the Revolution of 1968. When I taught your fathers and mothers the very same thing I am about to teach you now. And they went out into the streets and fought for the rights of the Arbeiter and the working man, the laborers, the proletariat. A premature revolution as it turned out. But now, perhaps we may begin once more to bring it to fruition. Ja? At once, the class shouts back, Jawohl, Herr Professor Doctor! Enraptured, they listen attentively as the great man launches into his lecture. From the beginning of this sad, benighted country, the battle for the soul of America has been waged over one simple issue: the individual versus the state. König George against this terrorist. How you call him? George Washington. You forsook the peace and security of a loving tyranny for the deep uncertainty of freedom. And yet, we cultured Europeans continue to hold out the red hand of friendship, fellowship, and understanding. After all, we call each other comrades, and sometimes even comrades in arms. Nothing would thrill our hearts more than to watch with you the serried ranks of goose-stepping soldiers, resplendent in their handsome uniforms, marching smartly on May Day for world peace. Scattered applause, murmurs of right on, all power to the people, etc. The ancient professor nods to his comely teaching assistant, who flicks on a PowerPoint presentation, which consists mostly of covers of the old German communist publication, Die Rote Fahne, the Red Flag, accompanied by Soviet choral music sung by the Red Army Choir, as he provides the voiceover. And yet you fools, you continue to honor the lone wolf, the reluctant warrior, the yeoman farmer. Warum? Which would you rather be? A freeborn Roman or Caligula? A young woman of marriageable age or Henry VIII? A French peasant or the Sun King? I think the antwort is clear. But what about the right to be left alone? Comes a question from the back of the room. Professor von Untzu Benjamin Marcus's head starts to rotate like Linda Blair's in The Exorcist. Who said that? He shouts. I will have him shot. Immediately, all the principled young people turn and point out the miscreant. A strangely crew-cut kid who obviously doesn't belong in this group of radical freethinkers. Your papers, please, the professor says to the hapless idiot. What is your name? Marlin Kurt, sir, replies the kid. The professor gives him the fisheye. Ja, so, Kurtz, if that is your real name. You remind me of Greta Garbo. You want to be alone. Forget such nonsense. We will not leave you alone. We are here to help you, correct you, fix what is wrong with you. That is what progressivism is all about. You need our help, and you will accept it. This is why we are known as, what do you call it? The good guys. Amidst the applause, a hand goes up. Dave notices that it's that strangely sexy Myrna chick, who made her bones early in the semester by holing up in her dorm room at Bernard for nearly a month, existing on a starvation diet of Diet Coke, Oreos, and takeout sushi, until the Episcopal Church withdrew its moral support from Israel. From that point on, she got straight A's from all her professors, whether she showed up to class or not. Professor Ben, if you don't mind me calling you that, if the people united can never be defeated, how come they're always defeated? That there's always another revolution to be fought and won? I mean, do we just, suck, or what? The professor pretends to give her query a moment's thought. You have an expression in your country, which goes something like this. Everybody loves the Unterhund, no? The Unterhund? Asked Myrna. You mean the underdog? Ja, the Unterhund. The bottom dog, so zu sagen. We are the Unterhund, and we must stay the Unterhund. And who has been more the Unterhund throughout history than us? The mean, the nasty, the duplicitous, the whiny, the weak, and the contentious. All together now, united as one. And if the side of the oppressor is the mastiff's powerful jaws, then we, proudly, are his hindquarters, and underbelly, the reflection of life, of the struggle as it really is.
And that was Chapter 8, or at least Part 1 of Chapter 8, from Rules for Radical Conservatives by David Kahane. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Retrogrades. 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left. Rule 9.
Rule 9. Control of language is control of thought. Don't let radicals control the language. Let me take this opportunity to invert a pompous Marxist aphorism. Language, as opposed to religion, is the true opiate of the masses. It is for this reason that a calling card of tyrannical regimes throughout history has been their inclination to cloak their true despotic natures in the disarming nomenclature of enlightened, urbane, first world, free societies. Dystopian dictatorships habitually employ language that superficially calls to mind the benevolent governments of Western civil society, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, the People's Republic of China, the East German Democratic Republic, and Democratic Kampuchea are but a few examples. Each of these states is or was a smoldering beacon of hell on earth, but by invoking universally desirable governmental attributes like representation, democracy, populism, and republic in the appellations of their respective states, Machiavellian autocrats have placated their gullible subjects through sheer power of suggestion. Retrogrades must learn from the mistakes of history. We must concertedly resist the slow poison of lingual manipulation. The manipulation of language is, at its core, the manipulation of people. Lexical trickery is not limited to tin pot dictatorships. Quite the contrary, it is a tactic employed by radicals of all stripes. Radicals are well aware that if they were to do intellectual battle with free market natural rights conservatives on a level academic playing field, they'd be thoroughly humiliated, quickly checkmated by the cruel hand of unshackled reason. Thus, to borrow from Captain Jack Sparrow, that doesn't give the liberals much incentive to fight fair, does it? After all, facts are stubborn things that speak volumes if left unmolested by deceitful party lines. Since radicalism is wrong in both its presuppositions and conclusions, its recent palpable successes can only have followed on the heels of radicals' successes in controlling our language and discourse. Examples of radicals' lingual tampering are legion. Brutally slaughtering and dismembering babies in utero is now lauded as women's reproductive rights. Illegal aliens are now undocumented workers. The judicial redefinition of marriage to include deviant sodomitical unions is marriage equality. Workplace and educational sex-based favoritism has become women's advancement. Disarming law-abiding citizens is now praised as common sense gun regulation. Muslims beheading people in the name of Allah is workplace violence. The most violent religion on earth is the religion of peace. Anti-Christian bigotry masquerades as the separation of church and state. Indoctrinating 6-year-olds with homosexual and transsexual filth is an anti-bullying campaign. And government theft through unfairly staggered tax brackets is having the rich pay their fair share. Right speak predominates in these Orwellian times. To draw upon a few of the foregoing examples, we can confidently state that Planned Parenthood wouldn't be long for this world if it had to publicly acknowledge, rather than mask, the fact that its business model revolves around child assassination. Fewer people would balk about deporting immigrants if they understood them to be criminally present in the United States. If radicals had to admit that homosexuals have always had the right to marry a person of the opposite sex, it would be more difficult for them to rationalize the whimsical redefinition of a timeless institution. There would be a dearth of gender dysphoric, synthetic hormone guzzling 9-year-olds running around if we could only admit that it's virtuous to be repulsed by hairy, female-impersonating men wearing lipstick and gowns. Thus, for radicals, facts such as these must be circumvented with mendacious euphemisms if they are to win over the average American. It falls on retrogrades to push back against the lingual manipulation of radicals, refusing to have our vocabulary dictated to us. Another front in radicals' war on word usage is that of gender-neutral language. As with radicals' policing of what passes for acceptable vocabulary, we must resist rewriting the English language so that it conforms to feminist sensibilities. One component of the gender-neutral language theater that is particularly deserving of our attention is the use of so-called inclusive pronouns. It is, and always has been, proper to use the masculine pronouns he, him, and his when referring to a generic person or to a person of unknown sex, since English does not have a third-person singular, gender-neutral pronoun. In precise writing and speaking, all gender-neutral alternatives to the masculine third-person pronoun are to be shunned, as they represent nothing short of the sheer torture of the English language. Nevertheless, a great deal of lobotomized, neutered mod cons bend over backwards to use unwieldy, politically correct phrases like he or she, his or hers, S/HE, he, or the cringeworthy they when speaking of a singular third person to avoid seeming chauvinistic. By capitulating to radicals' boulderization of the English language, we simply concede that the critique of latent sexism in the language is meritorious, whether we mean to convey assent or not. Language matters a lot, and radicals are highly cognizant of this. If we continue to cede control of the English language to scoldy, imperious SJWs, then we might as well just officially surrender Western society to them as a fait accompli. Stand your ground. Use the words that most faithfully describe a concept, not the unwieldy, hyphenated euphemism that the radical would prefer, because it tends to paint his agenda in a positive light. Conserve the rules of our language, and don't capitulate when radicals attempt to change them to conform to the asinine presumptions of critical theory. Language is a tool for communicating truth. If language is manipulated, then truth is manipulated.
And that was Rule 9 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy and David Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese.
Introduction. They shoved another establishment hack down our throats in 2012, and we lost again. The names change, George Ford or Mitt McDowell, but the results remain the same. Disaster for the Republican Party, but far more importantly, disaster for the country. Like many of you, I'm sadly not surprised, because the Republican Party has lost the popular vote in 5 of the last 6 elections. But that won't deter the Republican Party establishment from trying to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory yet again, and again, and again. Losing is in these people's DNA. They'll try to blow 2014 before we even get to 2016. The only reason they didn't blow it in 2010 is because the Tea Party, God bless them, dragged them kicking and screaming across the finish line. If we're going to stop them from blowing more elections, and thus finishing off whatever is left of our beloved constitutional republic, we're going to need as many people as possible to read this book. See, the very same people that have shoved these electable losers down our throats for decades now have reemerged from their beltway spider holes to tell us that Mitt Romney lost because, get this, he was too conservative. I know, I laughed out loud too, right before I realized the joke is really on us, our children and our grandchildren. So this is really no laughing matter. Now, these same losers are saying we have to abandon whatever shred of principled conservatism actually still exists within the Republican Party leadership in order to win. Yet we know that is a pernicious lie. Romney did everything the cynical Karl Rove wing of the party says Republicans have to do to win. He abandoned his conservative base when he said the grassroots uprising standing up for Chick-fil-A was, quote, not a part of my campaign. And he joined the liberal dogpile on Todd Akin. He played it safe and didn't offer any major tax or entitlement reform ideas to avoid the fiscal cliff out of fear of being demagogued. He ran on platitudes and talked more about how bad President Obama is rather than what plans for the future he had. He then became the first Republican presidential nominee to ever run pro-child-killing television ads, which aired in battleground states like Virginia, Ohio, and Iowa, all of which Romney lost, by the way. Romney also won key independents in several battleground states, and he still lost. If anything good can come from getting our butts kicked in 2012, it's that we've finally been able to debunk several lies and clever myths of the Republican Party's wretched ruling class. Lie and clever myth number 1. Republicans lose elections because they're too conservative, so independents side with Democrats. Truth. Romney won independent voters in the crucial swing battleground states of Virginia and Ohio, 2 of the 3 states he had to win the presidency. In Florida, the other key battleground state Romney had to have, he actually did 8 points better among independents than John McCain did in 2008. In Colorado, Romney won independents by 7 points after McCain lost independents in Colorado by 8 points in 2008. Translation, Romney did exactly what he had to do with independents and still lost. Reverse the outcome in Colorado, Florida, Ohio, and Virginia, and Romney is elected president of the United States. Lie and clever myth number 2. Romney lost because of the GOP's alleged war on women, so that means we can't be pro-life anymore. Truth. What the GOP really has is a diversity problem. White voters in every demographic, including women and young voters, voted for Romney. Let me repeat that. A majority of white voters, regardless of age and gender, voted Republican in the 2012 presidential election. Romney won white women by 14 points. A massive turnout of blacks and Latinos, the Democrat base, determined the election and gave Obama the support he needed to win. The Democrats won by doing a better job than the Republicans of turning out their base. Which leads me to my next point. Lie and clever myth number 3. The Republicans energized their base, but it's just shrinking, so the party has to move left. Truth. Promises that a swing of 17 million evangelicals that didn't vote in 2008 would show up and swing the 2012 election in Romney's favor never panned out. The reality is 2.5 million fewer evangelicals voted in 2012 than 2008. Fewer Catholics voted in 2012 than 2008 as well, despite the presence of 2 Catholic vice presidential candidates. 6.4 million evangelicals actually voted for Obama. In the crucial battleground state of Ohio, Obama actually improved his white evangelical turnout by 8% compared to 2008. I'm sure much of that is due to Obama's bailout of the auto industry there, which didn't stop Detroit from going bankrupt, but Romney running pro-child killing television ads probably didn't endear him to pro-life voters either. Romney also ran those pro-child killing television ads in Virginia, and CNN's exit polls found the evangelical turnout there declined by 7% compared to 2008. Yes, Romney did get the same hefty percentage of evangelical voters that George W. Bush got in his victorious 2004 campaign, but the turnout wasn't large enough. Apparently, all the efforts to distort Romney's far-left record as governor of Massachusetts and make him into some kind of conservative superhero at the same time he's shunning his base and flip-flopping on their issues did not pay off. Finally, get this, Romney even did worse among his fellow Mormons than George W. Bush did in 2004, if you can believe that. Romney lost the election in the end because his base wasn't as energized as Obama's. All the so-called skewed polling that pointed to an Obama turnout of Democrats similar to 2008 turned out to be correct. If you count the 2.5 million fewer evangelicals that voted compared to 2008, and the 6.4 million evangelicals that voted for Obama, a future Republican nominee has almost 9 million potential new voters in 2016, if he actually reaches out to them credibly and consistently. Adding a plurality of those 9 million voters to Romney's 2012 coalition would make the Republican nominee virtually unbeatable in 2016 or any other future election. But to accomplish that feat, he or she will have to make them feel welcome in the party and assure them that he or she shares their courage of conviction. But it's not just evangelicals that are tired of voting against Democrats rather than voting for Republicans. They are just one segment of the at least 6 million people that traditionally lean Republican and voted in 2008, but didn't vote in 2012. Then there were those that didn't stay home, but cast a protest vote instead, like the almost 45,000 liberty-loving Floridians that voted for Libertarian Party candidate Gary Johnson and provided 60% of Obama's 2012 margin for victory in that swing state. Then there's the emerging libertarian influence within the GOP cultivated by Ron and Rand Paul. These people are tired of voting for a lesser form of socialism under the Republican Party banner. And several of them I know were Ron Paul or bust voters in 2012. They never saw Romney as a true champion of limited government, so they didn't vote for him. Persistent attempts in the future to sell these patriots on milquetoast or to scare them into voting against dastardly Democrats may result in those doing the selling being handsomely rewarded by the Republican ruling class. But it likely will also result in more of them staying home and thus another Republican election loss. The real numbers show people are growing increasingly tired of being asked to cast votes they know they won't be proud of later. As frustration with the status quo grows, huge names like Sarah Palin are openly talking about the possibility of a third party, as is one of the biggest conservative websites in the country, Red State. Modernization of the Republican Party is one thing, but moderation is another. Compromise is one thing, but capitulation is another. What we need to do is make a list of everyone in the alleged conservative media that peddles party establishment propaganda or went on Fox News guaranteeing a Romney victory and told us how skewed all the mainstream media polls were, when in the last 3 presidential elections they've been exactly right, and resolve never to trust these false prophets again. Frankly, we should have known better than to trust them in the first place. During the past 2 primary cycles, didn't we watch many of these same people tell us Mike Huckabee was a Christian socialist, Ron Paul was a certifiable nutcase, Rick Santorum was a pro-life statist, and Newt Gingrich opposed the very Reagan Revolution he was a foot soldier in? Meanwhile, the establishment choice, Willard Romney, he could tiptoe between the raindrops without getting wet. The people trashing and slandering non-establishment candidates in primaries are the very same people that tell conservatives we have to be team players. See that as stand for nothing. And yet they attack us like they would never attack liberals. Perhaps if Romney had gone after the president in the final 2 debates on Benghazi, the way he went after the Gingrich and Santorums of the world in the primary, he wouldn't have lost the election. But now it's time to move forward. I recently spoke to a group of grassroots conservative activists at the Institute on the Constitution in Baltimore.
And that was part of the introduction to Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Have you heard people say resurrection didn't really happen? It's just a myth, an imagination, a fantasy. That's exactly what Christopher Hitchens, a well-renowned atheist, is saying here.
If you meet someone in the street who you yesterday saw execute, you can say either that an extraordinary miracle has occurred or that you are under a very grave misapprehension.
If it was just a misconception, I wonder why St. Peter and the apostles will go to their death proclaiming the risen Jesus. Here is Bishop Barron articulating that in a powerful way.
When Peter blithely says, "We who ate and drank with him after his resurrection from the dead." Myth, legend, bland, abstract, spiritual truth. That's somebody who's telling you something that happened to him. And mind you, with the exception of John, every one of those first disciples went to his death.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand quote of the day. Quote, "Observe that these modern relativists, with their credo of intellectual tolerance, of the open mind, of the anti-absolute, turn into howling dogmatics to denounce anyone who claims to possess knowledge. Observe that they tolerate anything except certainty and approve of anything except values." Unquote. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, my take.
Since Russia invaded, the administration has approved $113 billion worth of aid to Ukraine. It's asking for another $61 billion. Where are we going with this? The Ukrainian counteroffensive, started over the summer, does not appear to have pushed the Russians back very much. It's a stalemate at this point. The bottom line is we are paying for this war, and the longer it goes on, the more our support is questioned. I want to see Ukraine win, and by that I mean push all Russian troops out of the areas they've occupied since the invasion. That is a win. Is that Biden's idea of a win? I don't know, because the administration has not defined a win. The president seems to be on the fence. By slow-walking the supply of advanced military equipment, he's helped Ukraine not lose, but America is not going to finance an endless stalemate. There is opposition to another endless war. Israel's a different case. Israel is clearly responding to a threat to its very existence. It is the victim of unspeakable barbarity. Support runs deep, and so it should. But the Democrat Party is split. There is a strong and loud pro-Hamas lobby inside the party, restricting Biden's ability to go for a clear Israeli win. He's on the fence. On one hand, giving full support, but then calling on the Israelis to allow a humanitarian pause, whatever that means. The White House will not specifically condemn as extremists the students threatening Jews on college campuses and the Jew haters on the streets of our cities. There should be no ambivalence in war. Failure to win for Ukraine means a costly, endless stalemate. Failure to win for Israel means the state ceases to exist. We're left with a nagging question. Would these wars be happening if Biden had shown strength and a winning strategy when he first walked into the Oval Office? Second hour of Varney, just getting started.
So credit where credit's due with Mr. Stuart Varney. We got to say good for you for actually making a value statement, for coming out and announcing that he's not neutral. He's on the side of Ukraine. He wants to see Ukraine push Russia out of Ukraine. So he doesn't say why that's a good idea, and that's unfortunate. Also, the rest of his, he went back to neutrality after that. He was neutral on everything else. So there's no support for an endless war. Well, where do you stand on an endless war? And part of the reason it's an endless war is because usually it's a war on concepts rather than a war on a particular country. So like the war on terrorism. But anyways, I digress. So my position is I wouldn't give a nickel to Ukraine. I don't give a damn about either one of them. I'm sick and tired of Europe. The Europeans are cheap bastards who are bloodthirsty. All they want to do is slaughter one another. And if they're going to do that, then let them do it on their own dime. Spend your own money for it. Ukraine knew that Russia, for decades they knew Russia wanted to take them over. And so Ukraine has had decades to beef up its defense forces and get prepared for this. And or petition to get into NATO, either way. And they did nothing. They sat on their ass because they assumed that the United States would go ahead and pick up the tab for their defense, which we have so far. Wrong. We shouldn't. We should be actually trying to claw back and get to the Ukrainians to start paying us back and get out. No money, no tanks, no nothing. Ukraine sinks or swims on its own, or if our allies, France and Germany, if they want to go ahead and waste their money on another bloodthirsty campaign, that's up to them. But as far as I'm concerned, no, nothing. Just let them leave them to their own devices. But again, back to Stuart Varney. Stuart Varney should be making the case. what should happen and why. But at least he did enough, saying he did something in that he stood or presented his opinion about that he backs Ukraine. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Vivek-Ramaswamy.
My name is Vivek-Ramaswamy. I'm a businessman, not a politician. And I am worried that we're about to repeat some of our foreign policy disasters as we speak, as we march towards World War III. We spent $6.5 trillion. The Taliban is still in charge in Afghanistan. We have a hostile regime in Iraq. Those mistakes will end on my watch. My moral obligation as your next president is to look after the interests of Americans here in the homeland, period, not to fight somebody else's war. Our top enemy today, it isn't in the Middle East, it isn't Russia, it is communist China. So as your next president, my top objectives when it comes to foreign policy are to keep us out of World War III, to declare economic independence from communist China, and then to secure this homeland, starting with our own border and our own missile defense systems in the United States of America. That's how I'm going to lead this country.
And that was Vivek Ramaswamy. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the latest from Philosophy Who Needs It by Ayn Rand.
In all the reviews I read, this is the only passage that defends intelligence. A cautious little piece in the Saturday Review, October 9th, 1971, praises the book for the following. First of all, Dr. Skinner pays admirable attention to social problems. Skinner's sharp critique of punishment as largely ineffectual control is pertinent to the pressing question of prisons. In the context of the profound philosophical fundamentals that Mr. Skinner challenges, this sort of comment cannot even be classified as journalistic or range of the moment. This is range of the split second. After which the reviewer proceeds gently to blame Mr. Skinner for his lust to objectivize everything. This, he complains, destroys the mystery of man. Therefore, he concludes, placatingly, another dream of reason has ended as a nightmare of an eminent psychologist. In this case, perhaps the most influential of living American psychologists. But was it a good dream to begin with? Was it even an especially rational one? I.e., is it rational to use reason? We all know some of the devastating results of following the old imperative to control and subdue nature outside man, of adopting the dictum of Skinner's spiritual forebearer, Francis Bacon, that knowledge is power. Are we about to try the same experiment with manipulable man? This means that Mr. Skinner is a man of reason and a great scientist, whose theory would lead us to triumphs as brilliant as those achieved by the physical sciences, but we must not try it. The reviewer concludes, sweetly, thus only if the views of this book are for the most part rejected, will it really have a good effect on the social environment. I suppose on prison reform. This sort of mealy-mouthed insult is unfair to any book, even Mr. Skinner's. The review in Psychotherapy and Social Science Review, January 1972, is of a much higher caliber. It blasts many aspects of Mr. Skinner's notions, competently and effectively, then blasts itself by the following indications of its own viewpoint. But what in individual terms may be a struggle between narcissism and object, love, between indulgence in self and love of others, in societal terms becomes a struggle between anarchy and over-control. It is hard to know what the remedy should be. The reviewer mentions the vicissitudes of the personal and social superego, and the slowly accumulating evidence that man will always have to struggle with his dual and decisive nature. which consists of the capacity to think and to feel. He concludes, "But to pursue the last path, to attempt to turn pure instinct into pure reason is to fly in the face of the ambivalent nature of man." This means that Mr. Skinner is an advocate or representative of pure reason. And, perhaps to be able to face these unresolvable dilemmas and painful paradoxes without recourse to either impotence or grandiosity, may finally deserve the name of dignity. If behaviorism declares, through Mr. Skinner, I can resolve anything somehow, and its major rival school of psychology, Freudianism, advises, resign yourself to unresolvable dilemmas, behaviorism will win. The review in The Atlantic, October 1971, is a peculiar mixture. The reviewer, properly, condemns Mr. Skinner for his love of power over others. He attacks Mr. Skinner on a crucial issue, the destruction of language and therefore of judgment. But observe the following statement. Let us be clear. It is not the sublime dumbness of mysticism toward which Skinner's idealism moves. It is rather closer to the societies of 1984 and their newspeak, the atrophy of consciousness through the shriveling of language. In his best paragraph, the reviewer states that Skinner's own gospel of environmental determinism is one of the most serious threats conceivable to human survival. By eroding the sense of responsibility, it licenses people to shift the blame from themselves to the system. It provides universal exoneration for atrocity after atrocity, or for compliance after compliance. It works to increase the amount of evil in the world. This is eminently true. But a few paragraphs earlier, the reviewer said, determinism may be true, false, or both, but whatever it is, if it is used as Skinner uses it, the doom of conscious life is announced. How else can determinism be used? If a man cannot help what he does, how can he be held responsible for it? And if a given idea could be true, false, or both, at the same time and in the same respect, what sort of conscious life would be possible? The mystery of that reviewer's stand is solved by his last paragraph. Skinner believes that we can survive only if we allow a gigantic simplification of life. By that he must finally mean the atrophy of consciousness. He does not think that introspective, complex, self-doubting, self-torturing, self-indulgent, dissident, wordy people are efficient. He can set things up, he is sure, so that fewer such people occur. Does he not see that only silly geese lay golden eggs? This means Mr. Skinner represents reason, order, efficiency, but it is the emotion-ridden, contradiction-riddled, self-confessedly silly and sloppy souls who give value or meaning to life. The review in The New Leader, January 10th, 1972, is cruder and more open. It declares, the reasonable man, Shaw said, tries to adapt himself to the world. Certainly the behaviorist's approach. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. Also, and behaviorism is still, thank God, a science, not a technology. Also, history, no less than behavioristic experiments, proves that man is innately selfish. The manipulation of mankind is unacceptable, not because man is a noble being, but precisely because he is not. Those with power have always used it for their own ends, and there is no reason to suppose that their selfish preoccupations will diminish. This means one must assume that the totalitarian control and manipulation of noble, selfless beings by noble, selfless beings would be all right. Then there is a batch of small fry reviews which echo similar sentiments or no sentiments at all, make feeble objections, carefully miss the point, and do not commit themselves to anything. An astonishing one is a piece in Science News, August 7th, 1971, which seems to be written by a teenager and makes a remarkable statement. Mr. Skinner's new book, it announces, may be one of the most important of the century. Not only because it represents the summation of the Harvard psychologist's behavioristic approach to psychology, but because it goes beyond psychology into philosophy, and because Dr. Skinner's philosophy will probably be insulting to a great many people. Further, this particular expert declares that Dr. Skinner makes his arguments logically and rationally. After a collection of this kind, it is a relief to read the essay in the New York Review of Books, December 30th, 1971, entitled The Case Against B.F. Skinner. The essay is neither apologetic nor sentimental. It is bright and forceful. It is a demolition job. What it demolishes is Mr. Skinner's scientific pretensions, and, to this extent, it is a defense of science. Skinner's, speculations are devoid of scientific content, and do not even hint at general outlines of a possible science of human behavior. In regard to Skinner's claims must be evaluated according to the evidence presented for them. In the present instance, this is a simple task, since no evidence is presented. In fact, the question of evidence is beside the point, since the claims dissolve into triviality or incoherence under analysis. The reviewer employs one of the best methods of dealing with a false theory. He takes it literally. If Skinner's thesis is false, then there is no point in his having written the book or our reading it. But if his thesis is true, then there is also no point in his having written the book or our reading it. For the only point could be to modify behavior, and behavior, according to the thesis, is entirely controlled by arrangement of reinforcers. Therefore, reading the book could modify behavior only if it is a reinforcer. That is, if reading the book will increase the probability of the behavior that led to reading the book, assuming an appropriate state of deprivation. At this point, we seem to be reduced to gibberish. There are many other notable passages in that review, but its author is Noam Chomsky, who, philosophically, is a Cartesian linguist, advocating a theory to the effect that man's mental processes are determined by innate ideas, and who politically belongs to the New Left. I shall discuss shortly the two significant reviews that appeared in the New York Times, but the picture of our cultural devastation is clear. There are no defenders of reason in the country that was created not by historical accident, but by philosophical design. There are no defenders of freedom in what had once been the only moral social system on earth. There are no defenders of man's mind in the world's greatest scientific technological civilization. All that is left is a battle between the mystics of spirit and the mystics of muscle, between men guided by their feelings and men guided by their reflexes. We are passengers on a plane flying at tremendous speed. One of these days, we will discover that its cockpit is empty. Newspapers do not create a culture. They are its product. They are transmission belts that carry ideas from the universities to the general public. The New York Times is one of the most influential newspapers in this country and a good indicator of our cultural trends. It published 2 reviews of Mr. Skinner's book, which, in different ways, are the most objectionable ones of the lot. There is just no gainsaying the profound importance of B.F. Skinner's new book, Beyond Freedom and Dignity. If you plan to read only one book this year, this is probably the one you should choose. This is the opening of the review in the Daily Times, September 22nd, 1971. The only essentially favorable review I found. Dr. Skinner's message is hard to take, the reviewer claims, but warns that it cannot be dismissed so frivolously. Then, without protective evasions, He summarizes accurately the brutal essentials of Mr. Skinner's thesis and declares, all of which is logically unassailable. Attempting, apparently, to resist the thesis, he states, one tries reviewing the traditional criticisms of behaviorism. But even here, Skinner is not merely so vulnerable as he once seemed, for he has confronted his many critics with telling counter-arguments. To those who call his program totalitarian, he replies that the relation between the controller and the controlled is reciprocal.
And that was the next part of Chapter 13 of Philosophy Who Needs It by Ayn Rand. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.